this country. A loaf of bread can cost a fortune. But a full tank of fuel goes for less than a bottle of water. When an earthquake recently flattened its cities, its most breathtaking wonders stood untouched. And somehow, this struggling nation has produced more beauty queens than almost anywhere on Earth. It sits on the largest oil reserves on the planet, yet its money became worthless. None of it seems to add up until you look beneath the surface. This is Venezuela. The natural wonders almost no one talks about. Before we talk about money, oil, or crisis, you need to see what most cameras never show. Because Venezuela is not just a headline. It is one of the most staggering landscapes on the planet, and much of it barely reaches the outside world. Start with the water. In the deep south of the country, hidden among jungle and cloud, a river falls out of the sky. Angel Falls. At 979 meters, that is 3,212 feet, it is the tallest waterfall on Earth. It is so high that the water breaks apart on the way down. Long before it reaches the ground, most of it has turned to mist and simply vanishes into the air. The name sounds like it came from a legend. The truth is stranger. In the 1930s, an American pilot named Jimmy Angel flew over these plateaus looking for gold. Instead, he found a river pouring off the edge of a flat-topped mountain into nothing. Fascinated, he tried to land on the summit, and his plane sank into the mud, stranding him, his wife, and 2 companions for 11 days in the wild before they climbed down alive. He never found his gold. But the highest waterfall in the world now carries his name. The indigenous peoples had always called it something else, the fall from the deepest place, a reminder that this wonder existed long before it ever appeared on a map. Now look up, to the west, over Lake Maracaibo. There, where the Catatumbo River meets the lake, the sky catches fire. This is the Catatumbo lightning, the most relentless lightning storm on the planet. Warm Caribbean air collides with cold air spilling off the Andes, and the result is a storm that returns almost every single night. It flashes for up to 160 nights a year, and at its peak it can throw down hundreds of strikes in a single hour. It is the highest concentration of lightning found anywhere on Earth. Sit with the strangeness of that. In a country where much of the population knows the darkness of rolling blackouts, there is one corner where the night never really goes dark at all. While cities lose power, the sky over Maracaibo lights itself, again and again, in near silence, because the thunder breaks too high to be heard. For centuries, sailors steered by it. A lighthouse that no one built hung permanently in the sky. And that lake holds another secret, the origin of the country's very name. When Spanish ships first crossed these waters more than 500 years ago, they found entire villages of indigenous homes raised on wooden stilts above the surface, linked not by roads but by narrow canoes. The site reminded the explorers of the canals of Venice. So they named the region Little Venice, in their language, Venezuela. An entire nation named after houses standing on the water. And remarkably, those stilt villages still exist today, painted in bright Caribbean colors, their people still measuring distance not in miles but in currents and the slow rise and fall of the lake. And then there are the mountains that should not exist. Rising straight out of the jungle are the tepuis, immense flat-topped mountains with sheer cliffs that climb thousands of feet on every side, their summits lost in cloud. The stone they are cut from is close to 2 billion years old, older than almost anything else on the continent, laid down long before the Andes ever existed. They stand like islands marooned in the air. The most famous of them, Mount Roraima, was so otherworldly that it inspired Arthur Conan Doyle to write The Lost World, a story of a plateau where prehistoric creatures still survived. Seen from above, you understand why. Their summits, cut off from the world for millions of years, hold plants and creatures found nowhere else on Earth, living islands in the sky. These are landscapes that seem to belong to another planet, or to another age of this one. Descend from those heights and the country opens into something else again, the Grand Sabana, a vast savanna of red earth and lone tepuis, and beyond it, the Venezuelan Amazon, one of the most biodiverse regions anywhere on the globe. Dense jungle, endless rivers, jaguars, pink river dolphins, and anacondas that can reach 12 meters, nearly 40 feet, long. Deep within it, indigenous peoples like the Yanomami still live much as their ancestors did, an entire community sometimes sharing a single vast circular roof, taking from the forest only what the forest can quietly grow back. This is where Venezuela begins, not with what it lacks, but with what it has. Keep that in mind, because everything that follows only makes sense against this backdrop of almost impossible beauty. And keep one question ready too. How does a country holding all of this end up as one of the most misunderstood places on Earth? Hold it. We are getting there. The obsession with beauty. There is one thing the world has said about Venezuela for decades, long before the crisis made the news. Its people, and especially its women, are among the most beautiful on Earth. This is not just flattery. It is written into the record books. Venezuela has won 7 Miss Universe crowns. Across the 4 biggest international pageants combined, Miss Universe, Miss World, Miss International, and Miss Earth, it has taken 24 titles, standing at or near the very top of the entire world. For a country of its size, that is astonishing. So the obvious question is, why here? The easy answer is genetics, the blend of indigenous, African, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese ancestry that Venezuelans will proudly tell you created something unique. But that is not the real answer. The real answer is discipline. In Venezuela, beauty has been treated less like luck and more like a sport. Across the country, pageant academies train young women the way Olympic programs train athletes. Girls as young as 14 begin learning posture, diction, languages, interview skills, stage presence, every detail rehearsed and refined. For years, one legendary academy became world famous for producing Miss Universe winners with a consistency that looked almost engineered. Inside those academies, every imperfection is cataloged and then attacked. Trainers, stylists, diction coaches, dentists, and surgeons all working on a single contestant at once. The goal was never just to win a sash. It was to build, deliberately, a national export, the Venezuelan beauty queen, recognized around the world. And there is a harder edge to this obsession too. This region of the world leads the planet in cosmetic surgery. Latin American countries sit among the highest rates anywhere. Venezuela built an entire culture around what some have called beauty factories, where the pursuit of a perfect image runs deep, sometimes uncomfortably deep, and the pressure to be flawless can start disturbingly young. Wit is a phenomenon worth understanding honestly, without mockery and without applause. Extraordinary pride and real cost, standing side by side. Do you think Venezuelan women deserve their reputation as the most beautiful in the world, or is the country in your corner of the planet just as striking? Tell me in the comments. I read them, but here is what outsiders usually miss. For most Venezuelans, looking good is not vanity. It is dignity. Getting dressed up just to walk to the corner store is normal. Presenting yourself well, no matter how little money you have, is a point of pride that runs to the bone. It is a quiet refusal. A way of saying, my circumstances do not get to decide my worth. In a place where so much has been taken, appearance became one thing that could not be taken away. That refusal, that insistence on holding your head up, is not just about beauty. As you are about to see, it runs through everything. Lake Maracaibo, the 36-million-year-old basin that made Venezuela. To understand this country, you have to understand one body of water in the northwest, Lake Maracaibo. It is the largest lake in all of South America and one of the oldest on the entire planet, a basin that formed something like 36 million years ago. It spreads across roughly 5,000 square miles, about 13,000 square kilometers, a vast, brackish expanse where the Caribbean seeps in and rivers pour down from the Andes. And two extraordinary things came out of this single lake, a name and a fortune. First, the name. More than 500 years ago, when Spanish ships first crossed these waters, they found entire villages of indigenous homes raised on wooden stilts above the surface, linked not by roads, but by narrow canoes gliding between them. The site reminded the explorers of the canals of Venice. So they called the region Little Venice, in their language, Venezuela, an entire nation named after houses standing on this lake. And remarkably, those stilt villages still exist today, painted in bright Caribbean colors, their people still measuring distance not in miles, but in currents, and the slow rise and fall of the water. Then there is the fortune, and it is the reason the whole world eventually learned Venezuela's name. Beneath and around this ancient lake lies one of the richest oil reservoirs on Earth. For ages, crude seeped up naturally through the ground here in dark, tar-like pools. The indigenous peoples had used it for centuries before anyone understood what it was. Then, in 1914, the first great well was drilled, and everything changed. The Maracaibo Basin alone holds around a fifth of Venezuela's oil and drove most of the country's production for a century. This single lake is, quite literally, the cradle of Venezuelan oil. And there is one more secret this lake keeps, a phenomenon found almost nowhere else on Earth. Where the Catatumbo River flows into its southern end, the sky catches fire. This is the Catatumbo lightning, the most relentless lightning storm on the planet. Warm Caribbean air collides with cold air spilling off the Andes, and the result is a storm that returns almost every single night, flashing for up to 160 nights a year, at times hundreds of strikes in a single hour. It is the highest concentration of lightning found anywhere in the world. Sit with that image. In a country that knows the darkness of endless blackouts, there is one corner where the night never truly goes dark, where the sky lights itself, again and again, in near silence, because the thunder breaks too high to be heard. For centuries, sailors steered by it, a lighthouse that no one built. One lake. The country's name, the country's oil, and one of the planet's strangest wonders, all in the same place. Hold that idea, a nation whose greatest fortune and greatest paradox were born from the very same water, because that fortune is exactly what we cannot yet explain. The paradox, the richest ground, the poorest pockets. Now we arrive at the question at the heart of everything. How can a country this rich leave its people this poor? Let's be precise, because this is exactly where most videos get it wrong. The legal minimum wage in Venezuela is 130 bolivars a month. At the exchange rate, that is about 27 cents. 27 cents for a full month of work. It has been frozen at that level for years. But, and this matters, almost no one actually survives on that number alone, and it would be dishonest to pretend they do. The government tops up income through a system of non-salary bonuses, an economic bonus of around $200 a month, plus a food allowance of about $40, bringing the real total closer to $240 a month for many workers. Here is the catch. Because those bonuses are not technically salary, they do not count toward pensions, severance, or benefits, and they do not reach retirees or the millions of people in informal work at all. So the true picture is not a cartoon of $50 poverty. It is more complicated, more fragile, and in some ways more troubling than that. Now picture the streets where this plays out, the markets of Caracas, the neighborhoods that climb the hillsides and never appear in the tourist brochures, but where a huge share of the population actually lives, where the real life of the country happens, far from the polished image usually shown to the world. A shopper doing math on every single item, because prices can change between the morning and the afternoon. Common things, rice, flour, eggs, medicine, that could cost more than an entire month's wage. There is one image that sums up the whole absurdity. For years, filling a fuel tank could cost less than a single bottle of water. A country drowning in oil, holding money that had drowned. And here the paradox sharpens to a point. This is a country with the largest oil reserves on the planet, with enormous reserves of gas, and one of the great gold concentrations in all of Latin America beneath its soil. A land so rich in legend that generations of European explorers marched into its jungles, convinced the golden city of El Dorado was hidden here, and many of them never came back out. So the question that Venezuelans themselves keep asking, the one that echoes under every conversation, is brutally simple. Who is keeping the wealth of the country? To feel how far the fall was, remember where this country started. For most of the 20th century, Venezuela was the richest nation in Latin America. Its capital was compared to Paris. Its people traveled the world freely, and it built one of the most vibrant cultures in the hemisphere on a river of oil money that seemed like it would never run dry. That is the height this country fell from. Not from poverty into poverty, but from being the envy of a continent into a place where a month of wages cannot fill a shopping cart. Hold on to that question. We will answer it fully. The machine of oil and the machine of money that together broke this country. But first, there is a side of Venezuela that all of this hardship has never managed to kill. The other 90%. Remember what I said at the start, that the crisis is maybe 10% of the story? This is the other 90. Because if you spend any time around Venezuelans, one thing overwhelms every headline. This is a culture that refuses to stop living. It starts, like so much here, with food. And in Venezuela, food is identity. Ask about breakfast, and you will hear one word said with real love: the arepa. A thick corn cake, grilled or fried until golden, split open and filled with whatever you have: shredded beef, black beans, fried cheese, avocado, or the beloved reina pepiada, a creamy chicken and avocado filling. Every family has its own recipe. Every neighborhood has its own spot that has been serving it for years. Then comes lunch, the real event of the day, crowned by the pabellón criollo: shredded beef, black beans, white rice, and fried sweet plantains. 4 simple things on one plate that somehow become transcendent. Add tequeños, crisp fried sticks of dough wrapped around white cheese that vanish from a table in seconds. Add cachapas, sweet corn pancakes folded around cheese so fresh it squeaks. Add hallacas at Christmas, a dish so involved it takes 2 days to make and 3 seconds to eat. A recipe handed down like an heirloom, every family swearing theirs is the true one. This is not just cuisine. It is memory you can hold in your hands, and it is never eaten alone. In Venezuela, a Sunday family lunch can stretch 4 hours, conversations overlapping, music playing, children running around the table. Extended family is not an occasional visitor here. Grandparents, cousins, neighbors who might as well be family, they are the web of support that has carried millions of people through the hardest years of their lives. And then there is the social life, the thing that genuinely stuns outsiders. Because here is the truth about Venezuelans. They will always find a reason to celebrate. It does not matter what the economy is doing, it does not matter what is on the news. If it is Saturday night in Caracas, Maracaibo, or Valencia, people are going out. Nightlife here is not a luxury, it is a survival mechanism. Dancing is not something Venezuelans learn, it is something they absorb. Salsa, merengue, gaita, joropo, filling family gatherings and street parties. When a girl turns 15, her family throws a quinceañera, not a dinner, a production. A gown, a waltz, a court of honor, a DJ, dozens of guests, and a cake big enough to feed a neighborhood. Even families with almost nothing find a way to make it happen, because celebrating a daughter's step into adulthood is simply non-negotiable. There is a saying that captures the whole spirit of the place. El venezolano no llora, se ríe. The Venezuelan does not cry, they laugh. Not because the pain is not real, but because laughter, like music and food and a long Sunday table, is how people hold on to what actually matters. That is the Venezuela the headlines never show, and it is every bit as true as the crisis. And there is one more piece of that spirit so big, it deserves a chapter of its own. A nation that chose baseball. Here is something that surprises almost everyone. Look at the map of South America, and one obsession unites nearly every country on it: soccer. Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Uruguay. The whole continent lives and breathes the game. And then there is Venezuela, which quietly went another way entirely. Because in Venezuela, the national religion is not soccer, it is baseball. This is no passing fad. It runs deep and it runs old. The story goes that the game arrived in the late 1800s, carried in part by Venezuelan students returning from the United States and by oil workers who came to drill around Lake Maracaibo, and something about it simply took hold. The first Venezuelan baseball club was founded back in 1895, and the professional league followed in 1946. For well over a century, the game has been woven into the fabric of daily life, played on dusty lots and in packed stadiums, argued over at dinner tables, followed with the intensity most of the continent reserves for the World Cup. Nothing shows that passion like the Winter League. While Major League Baseball sleeps through the off-season, Venezuela's own league comes alive, and at its heart is one of the fiercest rivalries in all of sports, the Leones del Caracas against the Navegantes del Magallanes. They call it Los Eternos Rivales, the eternal rivals. It is a feud that stretches back to the 1940s, and it splits families down the middle. It is completely normal for a father and son, or two brothers, to sit side by side in the stands cheering for opposite teams. Caracas fans wave giant stuffed cats in the bleachers. Magallanes answers with a mascot dressed as a parrot. As one fan put it, watching these two teams play is the kind of thing that makes you feel your heart might come right out of your mouth. It is less a game than a national holiday that happens several times a season. And the results are staggering for a country of its size. Venezuela has sent more than 470 players to Major League Baseball, making it, after the Dominican Republic, the second largest source of Latin American talent in the entire league. The first arrived back in 1939. Luis Aparicio became the country's first Hall of Famer, a shortstop so brilliant he changed how the position was played. Then came Miguel Cabrera, a two-time most valuable player and one of the greatest hitters of his generation. And today, Ronald Acuna Jr. carries that flag as one of the most electric players in the sport. Think about what that means. Through economic collapse, through blackouts, through the departure of millions, Venezuela never stopped producing world-class ball players. In the hardest years, a boy with a broomstick for a bat and a bottle cap for a ball could still dream of the major leagues, and some of them made it all the way. Baseball became more than a sport here. It became a ladder out of poverty, a source of heroes, and proof that talent and joy can survive almost anything. When a Venezuelan takes the field in a stadium in the United States, an entire country watches, and for a few hours, the headlines disappear, and there is only the game. It is one of the purest things this nation has, a joy that no crisis, no shortage, and no blackout has ever been able to switch off. Daily life under hyperinflation. Now we come to the hardest part of the story, and the answer to the question we left open. Because to understand daily life in Venezuela, you have to understand the two machines that broke it, one made of oil and one made of money. Start with the oil, because it explains the first half of the paradox. Yes, Venezuela holds around 303 billion barrels, the largest reserves on Earth. But most of it sits in one region, the Orinoco Belt, and the crude there is not the light, easy oil of the Middle East. It is extra heavy crude, thick, dense, loaded with sulfur, so heavy it barely flows. To get it out, you cannot simply pump it. You have to inject steam to heat it, blend it with lighter oils to move it, and upgrade it in specialized plants before it can even be refined. All of that costs enormous money, which means the oil only turns a real profit when global prices are high. So the wealth is real, but it is locked. Abundance underground, scarcity on the surface. And when a whole economy leans on one heavy, hard-to-sell resource, it balances on a knife's edge. When the revenues fell, everything hidden underneath came rushing up at once. Then came the second machine, the money. Here is how it broke, simply. Picture a country with 10 banknotes and 10 products. Each costs 1 note. Now the state prints 100 notes, but there are still only 10 products. The products do not multiply, only the prices do. Do that over and over, and each note is worth less every day even as you hold more of them. That is inflation. And when it spirals out of control, it becomes hyperinflation, where a dollar once worth 4 bolivars came to cost more than $1 million. So here is Venezuela, all of it at once. A country with the most oil on Earth, where money became worthless, with the tallest waterfall on the planet, and a lake that gave the nation its name, where the lights still go out. A place the world calls beautiful, that the world also learned to pity, and both of those things are true, and neither one is the whole truth. Because in the end, Venezuela cannot be understood through its figures or its headlines. It is understood through its people, the ones who stayed and the ones forced to leave, the ones who dress with pride on almost nothing, who set a long table on a hard week, who fill a stadium to watch their country play, and who choose to laugh instead of cry. A nation defined not by its crisis, but by everything it refuses to surrender. That is Venezuela, and it is only one stop on this journey. Because the next place we are going is one of the most mysterious on the planet, a land guarding a secret even stranger than this one. It is already waiting for you. Click, and I'll see you there.